Hello, I'm Richard French. As America marks Memorial Day here in the nation's capital, thousands gather, as they do every day, at the war memorials behind me, paying tributes to the fallen from all of America's wars and honoring the memories of the 400,000 buried just across the Potomac in Arlington National Cemetery, as well as places of honor across this country. It is also a time to pay tribute to the veterans still living for their sacrifices. On this program, we will meet with 5 Vietnam vets sharing their stories of war and their journeys to make peace with that war. All 5 have friends whose names are engraved on this wall. These vets and all who served with them, they have earned our respect and the gratitude of a nation that didn't always, frankly, honor them properly for their service. All 5, they're now in the Hudson Valley, but their stories, they can be found in every town and every city in America. They've settled in our area, but their stories didn't all begin here.
I was born in the Bronx. I grew up in the Castle Hill section of the Bronx.
I was actually born in Suffern Hospital.
I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
I was born and raised in Burke County, Georgia.
I grew up in Portland, Maine, and I'm sure you'll be able to tell from my accent. It's not a Boston accent, it's a real Maine accent.
I grew right up here, right in this house that we're sitting in. And I've been here, we actually moved here in 1954. We lived in Nyack before that, and my mom bought the house here, and we've been here ever since.
Of course, I was working on a farm, and after that, I decided to come to New York to find a better job.
Went to St. Mary's School of Nursing in Rochester, Minnesota. And from there, I worked in an emergency room for 6 months.
Went to parochial grammar school, Holy Family, and then St. Helena's High School right near the Whitestone Bridge in the Bronx.
I went to the all-boys Catholic high school. My wife went to the all-girls Catholic high school, so you had to figure out how we got together. But we just celebrated our 51st wedding anniversary. So we were high school sweethearts.
So you're 17 years old. Obviously, you see what's going on in the world. What was going through your mind? Did you think that you'd be in Vietnam?
Not at all. 17 years old is an age where you really don't know, back then, you didn't know what was really going on. I didn't even know what Vietnam was about, to tell you the truth.
After high school, had no definite plans of going to college at that point. Didn't wise up until I was 42 years old to decide I had to complete my degree.
After I graduated from high school, I went to college for a year and a half. And I wasn't doing very well in those days, much smarter today. But anyway, and the draft was up.
I met with a recruiter and we discussed my alternatives about joining the Army. So that's what I did. I volunteered. After a meeting with him, I volunteered to serve.
You walk in and you decided to enlist. Talk about that conversation with the recruiter when you said, I'd like to join the military.
Well, I walked in and I said, I'd like to join the Army, and I want to go to Vietnam. Well, the recruiter actually was speechless, because nobody says that. But at the time, all of the nurses who were there had volunteered to go. And so that's really where I wanted to be, to take care of the guys that were giving their all.
The days of the 60s were a whole lot different than today. I don't want to say I got in a little bit of trouble, but I just had a wild lifestyle. I needed the Army.
I decided that I wasn't going to be drafted. I was going to have my own choice. So I had my draft notice, but I walked down to the recruiting office, and the first desk was the Marines. And I never got beyond the first desk. So I enlisted, and I thought I chose a profession that was safe. I was going to be a technician, okay? And then I ended up flying helicopters in Vietnam.
I knew that by the following March, when I turned 19, that I was going to be drafted. I did not want to go into the Army. I wanted to go into, I had friends that were in the Army. And the word was getting back about what was going on in Vietnam at that point. And I decided that I would try and get into the Navy.
When you decided that you were going to enlist, what was the reaction of family and friends?
My mother was devastated. My father had died. I was the oldest of two sons. I broke her heart. I still remember, I get a little emotional because I remember my mom. She dropped me off at the recruiting office the day I went to Parris Island. It was a tough day, one of the toughest days of my life. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for the draft, I probably never would have joined. I really had never considered it, but the reality was there. I had no I really didn't have much choice.
When I left Blauvelt, I went down to Whitehall Street. Whitehall Street is the biggest building I've ever been in because I've never been out of Blauvelt. I'm walking around this building like 3,000 other guys that just enlisted into the Army. You're in your underwear and you're carrying your clothes. How strange is that? You're getting inoculations by this guy, this guy's telling you what to do. And then all of a sudden you're dressed and I'm on a train going south.
What was basic training like?
It wasn't, it was kind of hard. It was new to me. It was hard. There's a lot of unusual stuff to get adjusted to. Carrying your backpack, your rifle, keeping your stuff clean, and bivouacking, just learning how the military act, the military operate.
The Army Nurse Corps, we were not warriors. Today, the nurses are warriors. We could not carry weapons, ever. When we went through basic training, they said that we could learn how to shoot the M16 if we wanted to. And coming from Minnesota, where everybody hunts, and I was comfortable with guns, I said, well, why not? I mean, if my patients are flat on their back and somebody comes through the door, I better know how to take care of them.
As a young recruit, you arrive at Parris Island. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. They've had you up all day. You're tired. And as soon as you step off the bus, they're yelling at you. And you're thinking, what did I do?
And they sent us up to Whidbey Island outside of Seattle for a week where we were put in a simulated prisoner of war camp where you were deprived of food and sleep, and by the second or third day, you thought it was the real deal.
Over the 90-day period, you transform. There's no question. You transform physically, you transform mentally. So that when you complete Marine boot camp at Parris Island, you probably think you could walk through a brick wall.
Before I stepped off that plane in Vietnam, I spent a good part of a year out in Fort Carson, Colorado, which I was with the 5th Infantry Mechanized Division. And I seen guys coming back from Vietnam, and some guys already had that, what they call the stare. They've seen everything go on. They've seen life. They've seen death. And I seen those guys, and I says, well, don't worry, Charlie. You're good here. You'll never go to Vietnam. I turned 18 years old. I got my orders. Off we go.
I got my orders to report to Fort Ord, California. That's where I processed out going into Vietnam in January of 1969.
The feeling on the plane, on the way over, was very positive. All of these wonderful young men, I think there were 2 females on that flight, and all of these wonderful young men wanted to help. Americans want to help.
I think it's just the reality that you're in a war zone. When you're attempting to land a commercial jet on a runway that's dark at night, and you look at the horizon out the window and you see traces flying, or you see explosions, it becomes the real deal. You know that all the training that they've prepared you for is going to help you survive it and get back.
And I got to Vietnam approximately February 14. I was stationed at a place called Phu Bai. Phu Bai was really the airport for Hue City.
There was about 214 guys on the Airlift International flight to Vietnam. We stopped in Alaska, refueled, and the next thing I knew, we were landing in Long Bay in Vietnam.
The only way I can explain it is, it's as if the earth was hurting.
Well, everybody was sort of nervous and not knowing what they was going into.
I get off this big plane, see nothing but GIs that are going home, and GIs as newbies that are just landing in Vietnam.
It was at nighttime when we landed. You herded into buses with concertina wire on the windows, and they're closed shut.
It was as if the negative feeling was so tremendous from the place.
Once we got there, you had to get adjusted to, a little fear.
You're whisked from the airport through downtown Saigon to a billeting place. That part of it was a little scary. Of course, it was a welcoming, a very harsh welcoming.
There is no words to exactly explain when I look at those guys that were out in the bush or whatever their job was at the time when they were there. They were different. They were different than I was coming in. They're different coming out.
When we returned, the first night in country, our vets share with us what it was like to first arrive in the war zone as Vietnam Reflections continues.
There was an air raid. There was some, to me, it sounded like the world was blowing up. They call incoming, you run out and you hide in a bunker for a while.
Some say the first night is the scariest night.
Absolutely. First night when we got into Benoit, matter of fact, there was an air raid. To me, it sounded like the world was blowing up. They call incoming, you run out and you hide in a bunker for a while. And I said, oh my God, they teach you that in boot camp and all of that, but you never think it's really gonna come to light and be reality. But then when you get into Vietnam, boy, was it reality.
When we got there, everybody was afraid because you're going into a war zone in action, so you never know what outcome going to be. You see some of your guys getting hurt or whatever, it's a lot. And sometimes you get traumatized with some of this stuff.
I think the first night is always the toughest. The first night was a reality. You realize that you're there. After all the training and after all of the talk about being there, you finally realize this is the real deal. First night that you come in contact with the enemy is something you'll always remember.
I don't know that it was the first night. It might have been the second or third. This was during Tet. We were taking incoming. It's a very helpless feeling. And so we're running to the bunker, and it was probably about 2 in the morning. And you really didn't get into your PJs. You were fairly dressed at the time, and maybe you took your boots off, but they were sitting right next to your cot. A round hit nearby. It was a rocket. The concussion knocked us all back. We were like the Keystone Cops. We all fell back. And you could hear the shrapnel pinging off the roof. We were able to get in, but the hooch next to us, the one guy never made it out.
Talk about your service and talk about your tour. Where were you? What was your unit like? What was your experience like?
Well, when I left Benoit, I flew down. They put us in Cam Ranh Bay. I was with Company B Support Battalion. I was a record driver and I was a retriever. What that exactly means is when the guys were out in the field, if a track blew off, we would go out and repair a track. If a truck got blown up, ran over a landmine or something, we'd go back and try to bring it back to the base, try to repair the truck, get it ready to go back out into the field. We would do convoy from Cam Ranh Bay all the way up to Nha Trang. With that, we would have a guy sitting on the top with an M60 guarding the whole trip the whole way and up and back and do whatever we had to do.
Well, I worked at 3rd Field Hospital for 6 months first, and that was in Saigon. And that was in an old school. I worked in the intensive care unit there. And we actually wore white uniforms, which I was surprised because everybody else was wearing fatigues. But I think it was because it was supposed to be the show place for whatever congressman or whatever came in. We got the same patients that everybody else did because they'd fly them in by helicopter. Or the fighting wasn't that far out of Saigon, so they'd bring them in by truck if they needed to. And so it was kind of bizarre in a way that you were pretending to be like a big city hospital, but you were getting these ravaged young men.
I was stationed in Soc Train, called the 13th Aviation Battalion Combat Unit. We was below the Mekong Delta. So we was a support unit with the Air Aviation Unit. So what they was doing, supplying support, and we was generating information.
Got my orders in August of '69. Thought I was going to get a ship. The Navy thought differently. When I first got there, was signed to a place called Sung Dak, which is in the very, very southern part of Vietnam. It bordered the Gulf of Thailand, and we operated in a place called the U Minh Forest, which was a heavy concentration of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. Our mission was to go out at night and patrol the river to see that there was no crossing of the rivers at that point. They're similar to what you would see during landing ships during World War II, where you have the ramp come down. Very, very heavily armed. We'd have, in addition to our regular M16s, we had grenade launcher on it. We had a 20 millimeter cannon, 2 of them, and we had twin 50 caliber machine guns. Then I was stationed on what they call the Grand Canal, and we would go out each evening at sunset and beach at some place along the canal. And it was our mission to interdict the enemy and stop the enemy if it crossed the canal.
And you couldn't write to the parents? You couldn't tell them, I saw your son, I was with him. You had to just keep going. I mean, they didn't allow you to write to the parents, which I can understand because your letter might get there before the Army did. But for me, this constant loss, finally I just had to kind of put a distance between, because you didn't have time to process anything. You just had to keep going to the next guy. I think that was the biggest thing, was that you couldn't mourn the loss of these guys. You also saw some really very injured fellows that you sent to Japan, and you had no idea what happened to them. The ones that I remember are the ones that didn't make it. And I think it's because you wanted so much, you worked so hard, and then they still died.
We were assigned to fly the rescue missions, or the resupply missions, into Khe Sanh. We'd take off with a flight of 8 helicopters. We'd fly up north to a place called Quang Tri. My first combat mission, which was now my second flight, was to relieve the Marines that were fighting the battle in Hue City. The weather was bad, so you couldn't climb to altitude. Ideally, you'd like to be at about 3,000 feet transiting, because you're pretty much out of the small arms range. The ceiling was like 300 feet, 400 feet. It was monsoon weather. We were only about 150 to 200 feet above the ground, and we go up a place called Highway 1. We were taking fire from everywhere. The M60s were barking out the side, returning fire. And that actually had been the first time I had really experienced any type of heavy fire. And we're coming across the rice paddies at about 200 feet, and I hear the flight leader say, "We're taking fire." And the very next thing that happens is I hear a couple of pops, and our warning panel lights up. We lost an engine, because we lost a fuel line, and we lost a hydraulic line. We have 2 engines, but we had 3,000 pounds of ammunition underneath, and we couldn't sustain flight anymore. The good news was we had 3 other aircraft, and as I'm running to the rescue aircraft, which is maybe 50 yards away, with my trusty .38, the crew chief on the rescue helicopter was shooting back towards us, and he shot a North Vietnamese soldier behind me.
Did you see some things you'll never forget?
Absolutely, absolutely. Second day I was in Vietnam, I was going into Cam Ranh Bay, and there's a deuce and a half flipped over in the bay, 6 GIs in the back of it, and the thing is underwater. And they needed somebody to come pick this truck up so they can get these guys out. I'm not even checked into my company yet, and they stuck me on my truck, and out I go, and I'm out there craning this thing up, and so they could get these guys out, And it was just, that was my first day. I'll never forget that first day.
The worst days is when we got alerts. We was always a target because we was a support unit. We had helicopters and we had communication there. So that's where the enemy wanted to get to. And they would have like alert if somebody was trying to infiltrate the perimeter. I don't know why I have like nightmares sometimes from being over there, I always go back in the infantry. That's the part that bothers me a lot. Sometimes I suppressed it, you know, most of it I suppressed it or so, but every so often you have these nightmares where you're going back into action. That's what's happening with me. Why do I keep going back into Vietnam? I don't know what brings it on.
The hardest thing I ever had over there was learning about triage. I mean, I remember pulling in and we're getting these victims off the helicopter, and the nurse or the doctors there, this person here, this person here, this person here, and this person dying. He's not going to make it. And he didn't get help because they have to save the survivors first. I didn't understand that at the time, and I was horrified, but then it made sense. I carry with me some missions where I couldn't successfully get them out. A night mission with no visibility, poor communication, make an attempt, can't clearly identify where the heck they are, and you'd have to wait till the dawn.
When you lose guys and the horrors of war you're exposed to and how fragile life is, I think that's the thing that sticks with you the most, and the lack of humanity when you talk about war.
For Vietnam vets, arriving home from this war often meant facing new challenges in a home country bitterly divided. More on that ahead, but as we take a break, a lighter moment in the chaos of war.
It is March 8th, 1970. It's my 21st birthday. That's a chocolate cake my mother sent me in Vietnam. She made the chocolate cake, put the icing on it, froze it solid, and wrapped it in aluminum foil and sent it off with a care package. It got there about 10 days later, and we cut the green mold off the bottom of it. We popped candles in it, and we had beer and chocolate cake.
You remember your last night in Vietnam?
Actually, I do. It was the night that the guys walked on the moon. And somebody said to me, "Oh, they're walking on the moon. Oh, come on into the officers club and watch." I said, "Who cares? Who cares? Our guys are dying over here. Who cares?" And I didn't watch. It didn't mean anything to me. Because somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's husband, somebody's father was going to be dying. So that really the landing on the moon meant nothing.
I had flown 900 missions, and I'd been shot down twice. I got shot down a second time. Again, I got rescued. Mary went to Mass every day for me, so I was in good stead. And then I decided I'm getting out. I'm not going to take another tour.
You always anticipate that day, and you look forward to it. And I think the worst thing to be around is a guy that's new in country and a guy that's short, because they're jumpy. And you just want to make sure that you make it out. Getting on that Freedom Bird, coming home to what we call the world, was special. It was a very special time. It was like, oh God, I made it.
As far as leaving Vietnam, everybody on the plane was happy. The happier part was when we landed. We landed in Fort Worth, California. We came back and processed in. So most of the guys, we kissed the ground. You know, hey, we're back. Hallelujah, we're here.
So what was homecoming like for you?
Different than what we see today with guys that are coming home in groups. I left by myself, like I said in the beginning. I came home by myself.
We had been told by the nurses who were coming in country that as soon as we got off the plane, when we got in the U.S., to get out of uniform, to carry a dress or whatever you're going to wear with you, change in the nearest bathroom, and then go home.
My brother and his wife, and my wife now, they picked me up at Fort Dix. I got dressed into my civilian clothes and we came home.
I was one of the fortunate ones. I wore a Navy uniform. So people did not necessarily associate Vietnam with the Navy.
The reception you got in uniform was so awful that who needs it? You know, now a lot of the guys had no choice.
Although the Vietnam vets were not treated very well. And I don't want to say I was abused, because when I came back, I basically for the next year and a half, I was with the Marines on active duty.
I went into the ladies' room, I took my fatigues off, my boots, and I threw them in the trash, and I wore my dress home.
So I was pretty much insulated from that. And so I didn't get a lot of what a lot of the troops got.
I can remember going into the airport in San Francisco to come home and not experiencing any of the horrible things that happened to guys that would walk in there with an Army uniform on.
Some of the Vietnam vets had it tough, where the public didn't embrace them for service. In fact, they blamed them for the war.
You know, I never ran into that, you know. So everybody that I'm associated with of my color, you know, whatever I ran into, it was, you know, I had no problem with it.
When I got back, I closed it off. That was it. It was shut out. I didn't talk about it. Didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to have any experiences related to it. It was just a part of my life that chapter of my life had closed, and that was it. I was moving on. And you bury it. You bury it for many years.
When I came home and I got those civilian clothes home, 2 weeks later, I got a job and went to work. Some of my friends didn't even know I was in Vietnam. I let my hair grow, you know, and just blended right back into civilian life.
This is my life, and I thank God that I'm able to be here and back safe. There's a lot of guys was over there in that area, didn't make it back. And I said, I have to take and go on with my life. And I did, but you know, with some of the things that I had to deal with, I just dealt with it the best way I knew how.
How tough was that for a lot of guys to reconcile with? They did what was asked and more for their country, but they didn't get the same recognition as maybe their fathers did.
Some guys were really depressed about that. I could be part of the PTSD thing, looking for, you know, a little bit of thank you or something for their services coming in. It was just a total different time than World War II. You know, it's I mean, those guys were treated very well with the whole everything, you know, parades in the city and the whole thing. And it's, you know, for us, it was just different. I didn't talk about Vietnam. I didn't say anything. Most of the guys are getting their due. Some guys will never. You know, they'll never get what, you know, some guys won't, you know. It's different now because the eyes are open. People are thanking us for our service and what we've done. The Tet Offensive, I wasn't there during that. I went right after that, and I couldn't imagine being there during Tet when everything broke out and just chaos went on, you know. But yeah, they need their respect. You know, they need to be known, you know, as the warriors that they were, and doing their time in Vietnam.
Not since the Civil War has America found itself so divided over a military operation. When we come back, the politics of Vietnam and the warriors caught in the crossfire.
When I went over, I had absolutely no idea whether the war was right or wrong.
You mentioned way, and for many, one of the things that stood out was more could have been done for the guys, more intelligence, either bad intelligence was there or too many guys were left for too long. At the time, as a young man, do you know that, or do you only learn about these things later?
Later. I mean, we weren't listening to Walter Cronkite, believe me. However, what happened there, there's no question, the enemy was underestimated. We weren't prepared. But the Marines and the Army reacted quite well. And although it was a bitter battle, the Americans actually won that battle, okay? Yeah. But it was portrayed, even by Walter Cronkite, as a loss. It wasn't a loss in terms of, well, we killed more people than they killed us, by far, by far. I mean, and I would say the only thing that I would reference politically or militarily is those in charge, the generals, the admirals, were more interested in body count than anything else. We made some mistakes. We never should have abandoned territory. We should have had the South Vietnamese troops come in after we'd won a battle and hold ground. You know, World War II, we held ground, okay, whether it was in Europe or in South Pacific. We don't hold ground these days. We go in, we leave, and we certainly did that in Vietnam. And one of my frustrations was when we going into the same zone every couple of months, we're getting shot at from the same locations. We clear the enemy out, and we depart. And 2 months later, we're doing the same thing again. That never made any sense to me.
When I went over, I had absolutely no idea whether the war was right or wrong. But after being in the intensive care unit, I was so angry at the United States for wasting these guys. I was so angry at the Army. I assumed that the Army would treasure each soldier. I mean, each soldier is a valuable person, and they're citizen soldiers. And they have been drafted. You know, by October, I turned to somebody and I said, you know, it'd be a lot cheaper if they just shot these guys at home, because it was doing that much good. Even the guys came in and said, they aren't letting us win.
During Vietnam, the general population, instead of taking out and holding the politicians accountable, they held the warriors accountable. I'd be the service personnel, and that was a big mistake, because the politicians should be held accountable. They are the ones that send our young off to war, and they should be accountable for what happens to them. And hopefully, as Iraq and Afghanistan continue to go on, we think about that before we get involved in other situations throughout the world where we put our youth at risk. As Americans, we have the obligation to absolutely question authority, to see that we have full disclosure of everything and the truth. We can always Monday morning quarterback about what went on about Vietnam, but I think our initial wishes as a country were to stop communism.
We portray war somewhat as a glorious thing. It's also portrayed today in the video games. There's nothing glorious about war. There's nothing great about war. It's a horrible, inhumane situation. And so when people think, well, we ought to go to war, well, they ought to have some skin in the game, quite honestly. I actually believe that we should have a draft. Today, we have approximately 1% of the population serves on active duty. In the draft, you force a mix of people. Look, it's very easy to say, yeah, let's go to war, if I don't have to do it, okay? I would tell you this: if you want to stop a war, start the draft.
Is there any message you hope the public knows when we're talking about Vietnam vets now? A lot of guys are getting older. And is there an important message that veterans would like to hear before we lose a lot of this population?
There's a need for assistance. There is a need, you know, because like you said, the guys, some could deal with it a little better than the others, and some can't, couldn't, and they just, some of them just out the lost. It's because they don't know what to do or where. I see sometimes I see them on the corners begging for money, you know, trying to make it from day to day.
To me, if you ask a citizen to go to war for you, you had better take care of them 100%. You have asked them to give the ultimate. You aren't giving it. You've asked them to give it. And so you should pay for whatever they need to have done. And that is really how I feel about that.
For the heroes that we profiled today, the journey has often been a long and a difficult one. But they have each found ways to not only find peace, but to give back in their own unique ways, including one who returns to Vietnam regularly and another who played an important role in the building of the Vietnam Women's Memorial.
Well, a lot of us were going back because we wanted to see the country. We wanted to have some sort of closure to see what happened after we left.
You were honored with the prestigious Buffalo Soldier honor from the county executive. Talk about what that meant to you.
That meant a lot because I never thought I would be recognized. I never looked for that honor. You know, I just served my country and came back and was living my life. And of course, somebody was observing me. So they recommended for me for that, that being a vet and the community service. Because right now, most of my work is done with the church. Pilgrim Baptist Church. I works there a lot, doing different things around there, feeding we have like a soup kitchen on every Friday. I help run that. And I help the youth, I drive for the youth. And I had a couple of times wherein I had a chance the church sent a truck down to New Orleans for that storm. So, it's trying to give back. Yeah, try to give back some because, I feel it's a blessing to be able to do and come back and do what I do.
You've done a lot. Not only have you connected with the guys, but talk about some of the groups, including the Nam Night Motorcycle Club. How did that come about, and tell people what it is?
The Nam Night Motorcycle Club, which I am the president of the Hudson Valley chapter, that's here in Rockland County. To be a member of this chapter, you either have to be military or law enforcement. We have an opening for patriots, which are neither. We go from the state of New Hampshire all the way to Florida. The whole East Coast is flooded with chapters. I think right now we're close into the high 60s, maybe even 70 chapters. We go to Arizona. We actually have 2 international chapters. We have 2 chapters in Canada. Canada had a lot of Vietnam veterans. We do fundraising, we do community work, and I don't know, and I started a lot of what we do as the chapter, helping people, young kids with cancer, people that need help. We helped a guy that was thrown out of his house, a veteran, from keeping him to become homeless. We flipped the bill and put him back in his house and helped him pay his bills. We raise money, that's what we raise it for.
We've spoken to a bunch of Vietnam vets and to a person in this third quarter and last quarter of their lives. They're going out of their way to give back. Some even going back to Vietnam.
I know.
Why do you think that is?
A lot of us want to give back because we can now. We have the teamwork to do that. I have my group of guys that we have. They're all on the same page as me. And if I say, listen, we need to give something, we need to do this, and they'll say, Charlie, let's do it.
What made you decide to get involved with the Memorial for Women, especially since when you threw your fatigues in the garbage, it seemed that you didn't want to look back anymore?
All of the feelings and everything kept bubbling up. And Diane Carlson Evans, who was my hoochmate and was my friend throughout the whole time and after, had asked me if I would be the representative on the East Coast. And I said, I don't know how you can talk about it. Don't ask me. I'm not. So every once in a while, she'd call me and ask me if I would. And about a year before the dedication, she called and she said, we're going to need people to talk to people, news people or, magazines or whoever wants. And could you do it? And I said, I will under one condition, that I can stop anytime I want if it gets to be too much. Because for me, it was like putting your hand on a hot plate. It was still raw. And so I started talking about it. Then the dedication came down in Washington. And it was the most amazing weekend. Because there were I would say maybe 2,000 or 3,000 women who had served over in Vietnam. When you talk to the women who served, it was like you had met someone from your own country that spoke the language that you did, and you didn't have to explain anything. And they totally understood what you were talking about. It was such a relief to know that these women were there.
Tell people about STEP.
2005, a good friend of mine, Howard Golden, he's a retired police chief from Spring Valley Police Department. Him and I got together and we decided that we wanted to go back to Vietnam. So we got together a group of 11 veterans who also wanted to go. And we contoured the trip in 2005 so that for a period of 3 weeks, we would visit each one of the locations that each one of the 11 of us served in. So it was a very, very special trip. A lot of us were going back because we wanted to see the country. We wanted to have some sort of closure to see what happened after we left. And we wanted a number of us wanted to put the demons to rest, having go back there to see how things turned out. Every place that we went, we were warmly received by the Vietnamese. There was no animosity, there was no hatred. We were welcomed every place we went. In fact, when they found out they were Americans, they would actually greet us and embrace us and thank us for coming back, and it was special. We saw a lot of poverty. The cities were okay, but once you got out to the outlying areas outside the cities, you were back in the Middle Ages. People were still living in straw huts, sustaining on meager rice and stuff like that. And we decided that we wanted to do something to help the kids. The kids really, as the kids did then when we served 30, 40 years before, the kids left an impression on us. And we came back to our Rotary Club and we said we wanted to do an international project. That's the Rose School. It's located in Dalat. Howard and I came back from that trip. We did fundraising. We raised almost $100,000 so that we could start that school. It housed 545 children. Subsequent trips, every 18 months, to try and meet their needs. We found out after we built the school, they had clean water problems, so we provided them with a clean water facility. The school became so big that it was 3 levels, that it started taking disabled children. They couldn't transport them between the 1st and the 3rd floor. STEP again turned around and said, okay, go ahead and proceed with putting in an elevator. We'll fund it.
Tell people about the Marine Corps League.
We're very fortunate here in Rockland County. We have a very good group of Marines, and we have a couple that are associates that aren't Marines, but they wanted to join us, a couple of Army guys. Probably our biggest thing is our Toys for Tots. That's a big event for us here in Rockland County, and we gather and donate 13,000 toys a year to needy kids within Rockland County. But now I do some peer-to-peer work, mentoring with either a couple of Vietnam veterans and an Iraqi veteran. We like to give back now, and that's really, and it's a win-win. If I'm with a veteran who's suffering from, let's say, mild PTSD, nothing heavy, mild PTSD, and they feel good over a cup of coffee that they've had a chance to talk, I feel good.
A half century after their service, our vets share their final reflections when we return. If you could go back and talk to the 17-year-old Charlie, what would you say?
Oh my God, what would I say to him?
With everything from the lives you helped save, meeting your husband and 2 kids that came, but yet all the horrors you saw and experienced, are you glad you went?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I would say probably 99.9% of the women that I know would say the same thing, that they would go again in a minute.
Why?
I think for many reasons. One was because you were actually participating. You know, that's one of the things I told my kids. I said, whatever you do, don't just stand on the sidelines. Step out and do it. Whether you're protesting something or whether you're for it. You know, Don't just stand on the sidelines and gripe.
So how are you different from when you first got off that big bird to when you finally came back home?
I'm older. You think I'm only 1 year older, but I'm not. I'm a lot older. Yeah, you respect life in a whole different aspect. Thank God for my wife. She stayed in contact with me all the time. I mean, we wrote each other every day. We eventually came back and got married. Her support helped me a lot. The things that I've seen in country, the things that I've learned, and just it stays with you forever. It does.
So I have 2 kids, my own, a son and a daughter, and I have of course my wife. Yes, and my grandkids is the one that's the joy. Well, you know, you have to raise your own kids, but when the grands come by, that's another added thing. Well, I work with help raise them until they're now in kindergarten and first grade. So then I have a new granddaughter that just arrived. She just turned a year old in April.
But I was 24 years old when I was in Vietnam. You know, the day I got shot down, February 21st, my son turned 2 months old to the day. Okay, so I think I had a more mature outlook, and I had a wife to come back to, and you know, and so on and so forth. A lot of these guys came back, they didn't do anything. You know, the world doesn't owe us a living, and I'd have to remind people from time to time. But yeah, they weren't treated as well. Today, you know, people say thank you for your service, which is very nice, but we've still got troops on multiple deployments, which isn't very nice.
If you could go back and talk to the 17-year-old Charlie, what would you say?
Oh my God, what would I say to him? Well, the 66-year-old Charlie has a lot of experience in life now as far as what's going to go on. As you go through Vietnam, that's where I grew up. I went from Charlie at 17 years old, just turned 18 years old to be there. When I came out, I was older, I was wiser, I had a lot of different outlooks on life. I wanted to live my life, that's for sure. When Charlie left, he loved motorcycles, and he came back and he's still doing it, you know. And we had just me and my wife. We're high school sweethearts. You know, we'll be married 47 years, and but we've actually been together since we're 16. So that's the backbone of my life. And you know, to say now that the world is good at times, but the world is mean at times. You have to take every day as it comes, and there's support out there for you, and there's help. There's a lot of guys that are in the same ship as you, and you know, if you ever need any help or anything, there's somebody there for you.
I think I would tell him, you've done a lot, there's more to do. Of course, you have regrets along the way, but you learn through your mistakes, and you learn to deal with life. Life throws you a lot of curves. Life is not fair at times, but this life we have is damn good.
5 extraordinary lives. 5 stories mirrored in the lives of millions of Vietnam vets from coast to coast. As a nation, we honor them for their service 5 decades ago and their contributions continuing to this day. I'm Richard French.